Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you think about drugs, you wonder about devices, obsess over pharmacy, or ponder over cannabis, this is the podcast for you. I do have to emphasize I'm an attorney, so I do have to say this. It's not legal advice. I have my guest on here. It's not clinical advice, but I do these podcasts, these video casts, these live streams because they are super fun. I get to talk to friends, talk to really smart people, and I find myself learning something new each time. So it'd be great to know if you're actually learning something. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe, and if you know someone who'd benefit from this, and I know I'm gonna have a few different people who will, please share. So if you want to reach out to me, you can always find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our guest today is someone actually I've known for several years. I've actually known him before his current role, and he is as a friend. I have to say this: he's unfortunately extremely charming and really smart, and that really bothers me. But But if you care about what medical science liaisons do, and if you care about the idea and trying to figure out what an MSL is, because I actually had this conversation very recently with someone, and they were basically like, "Aren't they supercharged salespeople?" I was like, "No, that is not what they are." But that was a physician who said that to me. So that role is extremely misunderstood. And they thought that they're not super. The way she phrased it to me was, they're not salespeople, wink, wink, right? And they were like, oh no, there's no wink, wink in that. But so if you are in the sales world and you're trying to learn from people, if you are in the medical affairs world and you're going, how are other people doing this? This is the conversation for you. Our guest for today is a senior MSL at Alexion. Just to be very clear, he does not represent Alexion, does not represent their opinions. These are all his individual opinions. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest for today, Dr. David Johnson. How are you, David?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
I mean, you start off first by making me look bad by having a pocket square. It's really freaking unfair. But having said that, I've known about it for 20 minutes now because we were waiting for the thing to come on, and I was still too lazy to put on a pocket square. So I feel like this one's on me at this point. So let's talk a little bit about your journey. And you, I've known you for, I know it was definitely since we worked at the hospital together, but I can't remember if we knew each other before that. I may or may not have. Do you remember?
I don't think we did. I mean, pharmacy, for pharmacists out there, and really probably in a lot of different medical persuasions, your profession is so small that right. If you didn't know the person, you knew the person who knew the person. And so right. Then you just get confused about, didn't we go to preschool together? And so you've just been pharmacists for, a few years. So I think that's probably it. But I think it was when we, did the moonlighting gig together.
Yeah. But the question is, you're doing something different now. So can we start from the first question? Because we actually have friends who work at at the gig we worked at who are asking this question right now. Mm-hmm. How do I become a medical science liaison, and should I become a medical science liaison? So what was your experience?
So I think your second question really is the top question. Should I, right? Because I think you get to a point in your career as a pharmacist or a physician or, a PhD researcher, and you really want to be doing all of the things that you like and that you love to do. And for me, it was, what do I like to do? I love science. We were talking earlier, and I'm a nerd, we are, everybody listening to this podcast is a nerd probably. So we love science, love to talk about science. And then you have the other extra piece that I think fits into the MSL world is, do you like to be social with people? And do you like science to be the kind of playing field in which you're social with folks? Because, being an MSL really is that. It's about being social, but social enough to be able to have this high level scientific conversations in a casual way and make people be comfortable with that dynamic, and then also developing those types of relationships, not in the short term, but in the very long term, which I hope is something that we'll talk about, is just kind of relationship development and how that is a long trajectory versus, a Richard Branson straight up to the space kind of trajectory, thinking about current affairs. But so I think, figuring out if that's for you is number one. Now, how do you get there? This is a conversation that I love too. And actually, I gave a talk to students at University of Pittsburgh Pharmacy School about a year ago, right before the world closed. And my topic was about going from the clinical role into a medical science liaison med affairs role. And, I talked about my journey and, gave some stories from that standpoint. But my last slide to that is one of those slides that has 1,000 different, rivers going into the ocean, because really you can take whatever skill you have and become, an advocate for science and patients. And that's really what it's about, is saying, what am I doing? Do I want to be talking, advocating, learning, being on the forefront of development of different science therapies for patients and physicians? And, what skills can I leverage? What skills can I leverage that I have right now to go through that direction? And then, of course, there are lots of different formalized ways you can do that with different societies and associations that kind of give you specific med affairs training. I didn't do any of that. I leveraged two things. Number one, I leveraged the role that I had. So I'm a transplant pharmacist by training. And in that role, you're collaborating with physicians, learning new science, dealing with rare diseases, talking to patients and their families about therapies. So that was, teaching students, medical students, residents, fellows, all of that. So which is essentially what medical science liaisons do. And I will, forever say this, you need to network with people who can get you there. So the person who let me in the door, quote unquote, was a mentor, former transplant pharmacist from Alexion, who is gone to another company now. And she was extremely pivotal to my to not just me getting into the pharmaceutical industry, but pivotal in just teaching me how to be a good MSL. I would say her name, but I don't have permission to say her name. But she knows who she is, and she's incredible.
So that's really interesting. But now I spoke to, again, a former coworker of ours, and I met her over the weekend. I was at the beach, and I know you were having a little bit of a vacation yourself. And she was telling me that she really wants to try new opportunities. And she keeps telling me it's so hard to get in. And on one hand, she absolutely desperately wants to do this. And on the other hand, she's going, I don't know. I feel like it's working for the dark side. And I'm kind of going, well, there's so much to unpack there. So if you were responding to her, what would your reaction be? Is it the dark side? And is it a step she should consider, and why should she consider it?
Got it. So I feel like I have had this conversation with her, not her, but other people. Everybody's always asking this question. Number one, is it the dark side? It's a business. Just like medicine in the hospital is a business at the end of the day. I think what makes being an MSL really great and allows you to kind of reconcile those, am I doing this for the dollar or am I doing this for the people, is your role and your regulatory role is to have a firewall between commercial. There are things that I cannot tell commercial people. There are conversations that I have with clinicians and scientists that I can't disclose with the commercial or sales side of things. My job isn't to make sure that a clinician that I talk to is selling. My job is to make sure that if they decide to make a choice for a patient, that they are most well informed with the data that is available from the newest clinical trials, and then also to give them an understanding that they can also be a part of this development of drugs and moving forward this indication or disease state that we may be studying. So really kind of have them partner in there. So I really think the relationships that we build are very scientific in nature, and it really helps you at the end of the day sleep and feel clean. I never feel like I'm doing anything bad from this standpoint. In fact, I joke with this all the time. One of the reasons I went into transplant was because I love to work with people. I love to be on teams. There's a cover of the American Journal of Transplantation at some time in like 2013 or something like that, that says transplant, the ultimate team sport. And in many ways it is. That's how you have to work in order to be a great transplant team. I kid you not, I feel more of a part of a team on my team than I did on previous teams. And that's what I love about being in the role that I am now, because I really feel like I have an impact that's extremely broad and extremely patient facing.
So you talk about being extremely patient facing. You talk about bringing new innovative therapies to the market so that patients can benefit. To that end, you had a really interesting experience today where you were helping a individual, and I'm trying to avoid the word KOL, but we had a whole discussion about this, and we'll talk about that as well. But you helped a KOL talk about the importance of diversity in clinical research. Now, here's my first question about that. My first question about that is, the FDA says it's important. I've had several interviews with people talking about the importance of diversity, but are you sick about talking about diversity? And like, shouldn't we have reached the point by now, the amount of times we've talked about diversity, where it's not a question anymore? Like, isn't this something that should have been handled already? And if not, why not?
I mean, that's a great question. So, in my mind, I hear the question as, shouldn't we have figured out all these problems by now? And like, yes, we should have. Of course, we should have. But it's not the should have question, it's the have we. And I think the clear answer to that is we haven't figured out all the answers to some of these problems that plague us as a society. And, I think right beneath your question comes into the not that you're necessarily asking this, but I think a lot of people might be thinking this is, do we have to talk about diversity again? And, I think that in and of itself tells you, we really need to educate people on why the importance of this isn't just a social feel-good type of thing, or it isn't just social and things that feel good. We are a social, animal, a social people, and everything that we do socially affects us in every single way. Medicine, other science, economically, judicially, it crosses the gamut. So one of the things that our speaker who spoke to our group globally, actually, it was a company-wide conversation that we had with this clinician. He really artfully laid out all those aspects and why they are important from a research standpoint, because if you don't have diversity in clinical studies, you're really not developing the medicines for people. You're developing the medicines for a person or a group potentially, but you're not developing the medicines for people. And I think we see that, especially right now, we're in a standpoint of where we want to give a medicine to a large group of people. And there are many good reasons why people are potentially skeptical. I'm not saying they're the greatest reasons, but that's a whole other set. But like there are understandable reasons historically and currently about why people may feel a certain way about drug development that we really need to flesh out.
So I want to pick on something I said, and I want you to comment about this. The use of the term KOL. And I already had someone who's a friend. She is incredibly smart. We've actually had her on the podcast before. She recommended the term stakeholder. So why KOL versus stakeholder, and does it matter?
So I don't think it matters. I'm about yeah, my name's David, right? So you can call me David, you can call me Dave. You know, I like it when you call me Dr. Johnson. But no, but I think it's you call people what they want to be called, and I think I haven't run into too many. I never call a person to their direct to their face. I feel like KOL is a word that you use in the third person versus the first. So I don't think it matters too much. I think KOL distinguishes between stakeholder because everyone's a stakeholder. Everyone in medicine has some sort of role that's important for them. I think the K of it really distinguishes the aspect of actually I think all those are KOL is important. Someone who's key on top, really moving forward. O, opinion, someone who has an opinion. Some people, if you're a stakeholder, you might have a vested interest, but you don't necessarily have an opinion about something moving forward. And then the K and the L kind of link each other together, but more fortify it in a way. And you're a leader in it. All stakeholders aren't necessarily leading and pushing forward. And then when you go from that, you can stratify it, of course, tier 1 KOL or global KOL, national, regional, local, and whatever. So I personally think it's a good industry, terminology, a little bit more than stakeholder.
But the reason I wanted to pick on it is because one of the things you said was there's a reason you use it, and there was some research around it. So,
sure.
So I thought that was really fascinating. And could you talk a little bit about what that was, just so?
For sure. And the research isn't why I use it per se, but I think the research is relevant. The really great people at the MSL Society, I think it's Sam Dyer, and then put together some data. I'm not 100% up to date with the data, but I remember coming across it at one of Sam's courses. And KOLs apparently like to be called KOLs. And the conversation that you and I had kind of previously was, who wouldn't want to be called a KOL, about anything? A key opinion leader? That sounds fantastic to me. So I think that kind of supports the data that he had out there, supports kind of the relevancy of that terminology. And there were different terms that different healthcare providers, some KOLs want to be called HCPs, or, some physicians hate the term provider or things along those lines, because it's just too broad. So, but I think overall, the, KOL was a term that kind of bubbled to the surface of all the terms that are kind of generally used.
So let's take on another topic, which I think is sort of interesting. So you talked about helping this physician, this KOL, this HCP, the stakeholder, to go to that next level and have a global talk. How were you involved in that? How is that the role of an MSL?
Oh, that's so great. So the role of an MSL at its core, at the center nucleus of it all, is to build and develop scientific relationships. Relationship being the key word of thing. And in some way in the future, relationship needs to be in, if a relationship is not in a job description for an MSL, then it's not an MSL role. But so last year, of course, when the awareness of social and racial injustice was kind of at a fever pitch in America. And I say awareness because this isn't something that's new. It's something that a lot more people are becoming aware of, right? And so when that happened, a lot of companies, including ours, although, we had been very on the forefront of not on the forefront, but we certainly, I think, from what I have seen in working with my colleagues, have been very open and very accepting about talking and having these discussions and doing all these things. But anyways, one of the things that I do in my role is I lead journal club discussion. And so like any journal club, we're talking about science, talking about the medical literature that's up to date. But at the beginning of it, I spend about 5 minutes just giving a cultural snapshot about what's going on. If it's Black History Month, if it's Women's History Month, if it's, Asian American Pacific Islander Month, giving like a 5-minute, hey, this is what's going on in this group within neurology to make it really central. And so when all this came across, we said, how can we elevate this and how can we make this a bit more? So one of the things that we're doing now is having a journal club that's devoted to some of the, health disparities, social determinants of health, within neurology about these topics. So that it evolved to that level. Then we said, hey, let's take it another step. And as a part, one of the things that we do also is we'll have guest lecture series, and we'll bring in physician clinicians to talk about their science, what's going on as it relates to indications that are important for us. But then we said, hey, this is something we need to learn about more. Let's bring in an expert who is a neurologist who has expertise in discussing social determinants of health in this environment and have that discussion. So we did that in February. And that was with our neurology group specifically. And then, we said, this is fantastic. Everybody in the company needs to see this, and it needs to be even more specific. So we have a group within our company that looks to how do we diversify clinical trials and really make them equitable to have medical justice. It's one of the things that the speaker this morning talked about was the Belmont report. And I haven't looked at the Belmont report since I had to do, compliance for clinical trials for a long time. So that was my bad in not knowing everything there. I know. But I didn't realize that one of the 3 components to that was justice and making sure equity. And this is, the Belmont report is not a new report. It's very old, but we certainly have not utilized those words to the fullest when we're thinking about clinical trial design. And so, just weaving in a part of that. And so we really has evolved from something that we were doing on literally for 2 minutes beforehand, and then taking it to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. And so that KOL was in my territory. So I had kind of weaved him into, building that relationship, understanding what his goals were, what our, helping him understand what our goals were, and really developing. And it's been over a year since that process has begun. And, one of the things I learned from a former leader of my group who's gone to a different company now, one of the first things he said to me at a conference, he said, David, and I had just certified and I was ready to get out in the field and I just wanted to make friends with every single clinician that I met. And he said, David, relationships take time. And this is, today is one of the fruits that, we were able to pick because of the time that was spent in that relationship.
Oh, sorry, that was not desired. I have YouTube music as I work, so that came on for a second. So let's talk about that second piece of this, though, right? So you're talking about clinical trial diversity. You talked about the value of the Belmont principles and how one of them actually includes the idea of justice. And the question is, how do you see diversity fitting into what you call medical justice?
Oh, I think it's a key role in identifying, aspects of diversity. And so, I think it's first to kind of go back and start at the beginning. And what is diversity? People are like, oh, diversity, like, if you're a shade of X color, then you're diverse. Well, diverse isn't a person, right? It's not an individual. It is a palette when you look at the picture of a whole. Like a thing can be diverse, but a person cannot, not a thing, but, a system can be diverse, but an individual cannot, in itself be diverse. And what is diversity? Diversity is more than just ethnic background or skin color. It's gender, it's sexual orientation, it's sex, it's, it's, are you a single parent? Are you married? What's your status? So it's the diversity is the tapestry of humanity represented accurately. And so I think if you represent that accurately in clinical trials, then you're really doing a service for science and actually seeing what things are. What isn't, diversity or aspects of clinical trials that help out diversity, diversity or having, more people who look like me in a trial isn't going to line a biological, finality out to, a outcome, but it will give you a spread of saying we have a large collection of phenotypes in the trial, so we can be confident about measures that we have. It doesn't necessarily give you a biological understanding because, as you know, and all the nerds who are listening now know, everybody's really smart. There's more, genetic, diversity in the group than in the broader group, humanity, than in any individual, social determinant, race population, which is really just a social construct. But again, another discussion. So I think these things are paramount. Diversity is paramount to social justice because to spin the word justice, we don't do justice to ourselves if we don't have the broadest idea of the types of medicine, and by that I mean science, that we're actually developing in the future.
I love that. So let me ask you this question now. So you're talking about the value of diversity. You're talking about bringing these people in. Did you do this internally for Alexion, or was this for HCPs across the world?
Oh, this was internal for Alexion.
Oh, yeah, you kind of hit the ball on that one, because I was going, how do we get invited for that? Because that sounds fascinating. Have you ever seen, like, on YouTube, they have these Google Talks, so like Google records these conversations. They have them for all different types of people. I wonder if Alexion would consider that. And obviously there are other issues that pop up, but I'd love to hear a topic from a global KOL/stakeholder talking about the importance of diversity and what can you actually do about it, as opposed to, like, I mean, we've got laws that push for it. You've got guidances from the FDA that push for it. You've got people campaigning for it. Obviously, it's a major goal. I guess my question that goes along with it is, and this is something you probably talked about, or your HCP talked about it earlier today. What did they say is preventing it? Like, how do we know we've achieved diversity?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's preventing it, and he didn't necessarily talk about this specifically because, it's not a secret that it's being prevented, but I think one of the things that's preventing it is it's hard, right? It's difficult. It's easy to say, hey, we have a clinical trial, and these are the people that are that are going to be included in the trial. The questions that he tackled were, why isn't this happening? So it's kind of the negative of that question, right? And it goes back to why haven't these things been overcome? Because there are systems that either from an implicit bias or an explicit bias make, either people who are going to be clinicians that are going to select patients in the trial to favor maybe one patient than another, implicitly, or, just the ease of being in a clinical trial. Think about the diversity from a socioeconomic standpoint. If you're someone who can't make it to get, a blood draw, every 2 weeks or something like that, or even every week or something like that, because of the just ability to get to the hospital or the amount of money that you time off to take from a job, you can't be in that trial. So you have a socioeconomic breakdown just from that. And we know that, at least in the United States, socioeconomics frequently break down with ethnic diversity or on ethnic lines. And so you then have another fault in breaking that. And as Mr. Regulatory extraordinaire, people aren't paid for clinical trials. They're reimbursed appropriately for the time that they are giving up. So I'm not saying that we should be paying people for it, because I'm not saying that at all. But these are some of the reasons why there are difficulties in there across the whole, other, gamut of reasons. And at the end of his talk, some of the questions were, now what can we do to alleviate those things? And he made a very good point of saying, we need to think about these problems up front. Having diversity in clinical trials is not a afterthought. It is at the beginning of the trial. Is just as important as saying, all right, this is going to be a 3-to-1 randomization. And even that in of itself is a call out for diversity. So really having that on your mind about how this project or the study is being structured around the core principles that were already there. The Belmont Report, that's over, what, 70 years old, or close to 70 years old at this point, 65 years old or so. So, you know, are we really doing the things for justice for all people? Justice for all. That's something else that's important, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but I know it's important in clinical trials, and that's certainly something that like needs to be talked and discussed about on, you know, multiple levels.
And we could keep going on, but as I told you, we try to aim for this to be about a 15-20 minute talk. We're well above that.
I know.
But it's super fun. So would love to have you back, by the way. And I can harass you. I seem to do that with a lot of my friends from previous jobs. So I'm going to harass you to come back because this was super, super fun. As I told you, we're going to be asking you 4 questions. So the first question, based on what we discussed, what is something you'd like to ask the audience?
I think I want to know from, you know, this it's going to be kind of a swerve from, you know, what we had been talking about the most part, and going back actually to the beginning. Sure. And it's more of a self-reflection question, but I'd also want to know too, is, are you getting out of what you're doing right now what you planned to get out of it when you first started down your path? And so, you know, evolving on that question is, does your current love for what you're doing look like the love that you had imagined in your first day of medical school, your first day of dental school, pharmacy school, nursing, whatever school, you know, art school, whatever? You know, does that look like that? Because then I think, you know, not to be, obviously I'm not a hippie, I have a pocket square in my arm, in my jacket, but like, you know, to just feel kind of that vibe, you know, a lot of this life is about happiness. And, you know, if we're not happy, then it's really hard to provide happiness for others in this world. So I think that's the question that I think I would want to ask people.
So I take a chance to respond. So my response to you, my life looks dramatically different from what I thought I'd be doing. That's not to say that it's not enjoyable. That's not to say that I'm not doing something I've learned I enjoy quite a bit, but it's very, very different. As I know you know this, but I'm a 6th-generation pharmacist. I thought I would be either owning a pharmacy or running a pharmaceutical company. What I do today is help them. It's a very different position to be in, and I quite enjoy what I do because I have a ton of flexibility. But is that, if you asked 6-year-old Darshan, is that what you're going to be doing? His first question would be, who are you and why are you here? But after that, it would probably be, it's not what I imagined. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to do what I'm doing, but I find goals evolve, and I was part of that evolution.
Well, I think the question is not, are you doing what you thought you'd be doing, but is the happiness quotient what you expected it to be? And so that's kind of where I'm getting at more. And it sounds like, you know, we start off in a place where we're like, oh, you know, I'm going to be doing this and it's going to make me a fireman. Yeah, exactly. Hey, are you, even though you're not a fireman right now, are you as happy as you thought you would be as a fireman?
I don't think anyone can be as happy as a 6-year-old wanting to be a fireman. I don't think that's really possible. I think the only one is probably like Clark Kent because he becomes a superhero. And that's the other thing. Or a dinosaur expert. One of the greatest lines I ever heard was, there are 2 times in life you actually know enough about dinosaurs. When you're a professor of being a dinosaur and a 6-year-old child. So
facts.
Facts, exactly. So that was my first question. My second question, what did you learn in the last month that some people just would benefit from knowing about?
You know, we talked about these questions a little bit earlier, so I thought I had an answer, and now I'm like, you know, I feel like I'm making my answers a little bit more broader than I should. I think the key thing is, you know, one, I've learned so much in the last month, and I think that's like a testament to, you know, staying engaged and being, you know, involved in kind of, you know, your world and your surrounding. All right, so one of the things I learned in the last month, was a little bit about. So I'm reading this book that's called Dare to Lead. It's by Brene Brown. She's big expert in sociology, expert in group business organization and stuff like that. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting. I've been learning about aspects of vulnerability and how they apply to leaderships and relationships. Relationships are a big part of my job, and so I like to kind of delve into that aspect. So one of the things I've learned from that book has been vulnerability sucks. And it's awful, and you just have to get through that part in order to get to the greatness of all relationships with KOLs, relationships with coworkers, marriage relationships, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever type of relationship you're in, you're going to be exposed into a realm of vulnerability. Don't shy away from it. Invest in it, and know that if it kind of sucks, you're probably doing it right. And keep on exercising that muscle in order to develop that relationship. So that's kind of something that I've learned within this month time frame.
That's a really interesting comment, though. The idea that vulnerability builds relationships. Is that a nice summary of what you just said? Vulnerability.
Yeah, completely. And the lack of vulnerability destroys relationships.
I don't even have a good response because that's so profound. I didn't even know.
There should be an air horn when you don't have a response to things. I don't think that ever happens.
No, because I guess my question really is it true? I mean, someone wrote a book about it, so it must be true. But the question is,
I was going to grab the book, but she's a PhD sociology, person. She's super smart. This is Brene Brown. Shout outs to her. All of her work is based on her very extensive research. Full disclosure, I haven't finished the book yet.
Turns out it tells you it's not don't be vulnerable.
But my lovely wife has. And she says I'm online with my conclusion so far. So she's, Brene Brown, Dr. Brown, super smart, and has done her life's research on these topics. So they're based in this, it's evidence based, which I like to be in many parts of my life. Certainly work.
I'm just really, really hoping right now that the last chapter is psych. Don't be vulnerable.
I want my money back.
Here's a question for this. What made you happy this week?
Oh my gosh. Honestly,
That depressing a week.
I'm just giving it.
You came back from vacation.
I'm just giving a little bit of thought. No, because I did come back from vacation, and I don't want to sound like mushy and corny, but I love having laughs with my wife because it's just really fun. And so, we're both really busy, and COVID has caused us to be in a tiny apartment, which has its joys, but certainly has its difficulties, its vulnerabilities. But I love spending time and laughing with her. And we had, some really great times on our trip, and that made me happy.
That's very cool. Now, let me ask you this question. So let me do a quick summary of where we are and what we've talked about. So during this conversation, we really talked a little bit about, and we talked about this before the conversation. We talked about how you do a actual launch of a product. But then we actually got into your transition from being a pharmacist in a academic medical center, and how you went from doing that in multiple different formats to being an MSL and rising up the ranks and developing these relationships and what that's meant for you. We then got into what and you talked a little bit about things like the importance of being a successful and the process of being a successful medical science liaison. And you talked about the science is social. You talked about relationship development. You talked about how it's important to be aware and available when the world closed. You talked about being there for patients. You talked about things that you can talk about with other MSLs, but you cannot communicate to sales, and that distinction and that barrier that must be kept. You talked about some of the jobs, the roles that you've played, things like having journal club. You talked a little bit about the last one being the one on social determinants of health, which I think is fascinating. You then pulled the rug from under all of us and told us that this is not for public consumption. It's only what you guys do internally. I was like, damn it. But that was true. You talked a little bit about clinical trials, and we delved into that. And we talked about how you brought a world leader, and they talked about diversity and how you tied that to the Belmont principles, specifically to the principle of justice. We didn't get a chance to get into a series of things. I really want to talk to you about patient centricity and planning and sort of mentoring and the like. But you talked a little bit about the impact of mentoring on you, for example, when you talked about how one of your mentors was instrumental in bringing you on and helping you develop. You talked a little bit about also big bad pharma going to the dark side, and and how it's not the dark side. It's just another business, and hate to break it to people, but if you're working in a hospital, you're still in a business, and you're just, sometimes you have more resources, sometimes you have less, sometimes you have a different job description, but that's something else to consider. Did I forget anything?
No, I mean, it's surprise, surprise. We talked about a lot, right? You and I.
Actually, we did land up talking about the importance of the term KOL as well. And is KOL the right term, or is there a different term that's appropriate? And someone did throw out the term stakeholder. So this was a really, really good chat. Let me ask you this, David, where can people reach you if they have questions?
So if people have questions, I'm happy to be reached at my work email. That's certainly fine. Please have them be, professional type of questions. It's just my name, david.johnson@alexion.com. And I'm happy to kind of field things through there. If I don't get back to you very quickly, remember it's my work email, so I am doing work on that email. But it's but I can filter things from that standpoint.
That's awesome. And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you know someone who'd like this podcast, please share it. I know I had a great time already. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Thanks, David.
Thank you.